Welcome to America's Heroes Group, our roundtable live stream digital media show. December is AIDS Awareness and National Human Rights Month. This is Wednesday, December 18th, 2024, and we want you to like and subscribe as much as you possibly can. You can like and subscribe as many times as you want. Come and see our shows on americashg.org and also see our shows on our YouTube channel and our Facebook channel. Make sure you help us help you by getting you the information that you need and you want to hear about. We have with us today, once again, the great Gigi Crowder, Executive Director of NAMI Contra Costa in California. NAMI is a National Alliance of Mental Health Illness and Advocacy group founded by family members of people with mental illness. And she brought us a guest today. That is Yvette Williams, the CEO of Back on Track Incorporated. And we're going to talk about the mission, programs, and services of Back on Track Expungement Services. How are you doing today?
Well, I am great, and I'm excited that we have Yvette with us today because so many individuals who live with mental illness often have contact with law enforcement on their path to wellness, and it's especially true for the veterans that we work with. So having a collaborative relationship with Back on Track has benefited NAMIs across the nation when you can recognize that you can't just wait for the public defender's office to put on their once a year clean slate programs. You need people who are looking for work. And so having this relationship with Yvette Williams has been really beneficial for us.
Yes.
And Yvette, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Tell us about Back on Track. So tell us about the expungement process first and how Back on Track kind of got involved and situated to help with that process.
Well, I fell in love with law in 1988. Originally, I wanted to become a forensic psychiatrist and interview serial killers. And then I realized I'm not good at math, so I can't prescribe medicine. So I stayed in law, and I was actually working for a criminal defense attorney in 1998. My then fiance, he was looking for work, and he forgot, because people do, believe it or not, they forget about an arrest that did not lead so much to a conviction. So he was being denied employment, and I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there. Anyway, so yeah, he was being denied employment. So I went to the lawyer I worked for, and I told him what the issue was. And he was like, well, you need to expunge his record. And I'm like, okay, how do I do that? So he gave me the day off with pay. And I walked to the library in downtown Oakland. And I did the research. I made copies of the paperwork, took it back to him. Then I took it back home and got the information that my fiance at the time had, submitted it to the court, and 3 months later, his charges was dismissed, and he was able to get an employment wherever he wanted to work. Actually,
now before we get into it, I have to ask you this question. Do you feel that in the Black community and in veteran communities and different marginalized communities that a lot of these charges were unnecessary or trumped up or exaggerated to an unfair extent?
That's a great question. Absolutely. Yes. I get to see the real truth of justice not being blind. I get to see very bad deals. I get to see all of it. And by the time, Sean, someone comes to me, they are very honest and truthful about their participation and the process it took them to get into trouble and the process it took them to get out. And I'm happy to be a part of that process.
So then if you've seen success or seen movement, I know you helped your boyfriend out, but did you see movement and things like that?
Yes. The first year that I actually started doing, that was in 1998 when I expunged my husband's record. So in 2008, so from 1998 to 2008, I just did it for friends who knew I knew how to do it. So in 2008, I actually started Back on Track Expungement Services. And the first year, all I did was market the business, meaning I would just go out and do presentations and shake hands and find my clients. That's all I did. was not concerned about making money. I have had a lot of success with men that wanted to become police officers, persons graduating law school, persons that went to medical school. There are certain charges that just stop you dead in your tracks. You can't get a license to work. I'm sorry, a contractor's license. Your degree may be worth nothing, depending on the charge. So the narrative pushing people to go to school and they have a felony or a misdemeanor, that becomes an issue. So a lot of times I will go to schools and do presentations and work with students while they're in training or looking to get their degree. So by the time they finish, the timing is right and they're able to pursue their dreams.
I'm not sure if this is a question for Gigi or you, Yvette. So either one of you can kind of chime in. Ask Gigi first. When you in your profession and working with people with mental illness, we know that a lot of times when police interact with people with mental illness, it does not end well or does not go well. The person either ends up in handcuffs and God forbid they end up dead sometimes. And do you see that as? Do you see do you see a lot of people with mental illness needing expungements?
Definitely. So you would think I'd spend a lot of time as the CEO of a mental health program working in treatment facilities. I spend more time in courtrooms.
Wow.
And visiting individuals who are incarcerated. We criminalize mental illness. So when a person, especially a person from a BIPOC community, and more specifically African American, they don't get the pass when they've done something while untreated for their mental illness. They are often charged. Some people are well aware of the fact that the Twin Towers in Los Angeles, California, is the largest mental health institution there is in the nation. So these are people who've committed a crime, but so many of them live with mental illness that they do more services around the mental health than the so-called rehabbing these individuals. So we're actually even on Monday going to go and support a young man who had childhood trauma. He had a strike. But he said, this is the first time ever in my life that I want to complete something. He started barber school after a judge told him, hey, we know you have these struggles that you've had. You have a diagnosis of ADHD. You've made some mistakes in your life. The last judge told him, we don't want to see you again. Go out and do something worthwhile. He chose barber school. He had a minor infraction. Someone came into a house he was living in and they found a small amount of drugs. And so they didn't immediately do anything about it. Then later, he was a part of a case in Antioch where individuals had been harmed. So all of a sudden they show up at his home and now he goes to court. He has to fight the charge. But what the judge said was, this is all grand and good that you want to finish barber school, but it is not going to matter because you'll be in jail and you should take what the DA offered you 2 years because what I'm going to give you is going to be so much worse. And so I'm looking at this young, Black man who is sharing with us that for the first time, he's going to complete something in March. So my advocacy is not about whether he did the crime or not. It never is. It's more about what's fair for him and to just have his trial not start on Monday, but instead start after he's able to get his barber's license. That's a small request.
Wow. And I want to ask you this, Yvette, based on what Gigi just talked about, in the prison system, okay, and these Twin Towers or the towers you're talking about in LA, they say the same thing about, we have a tower in downtown Chicago. They say the same thing about that. They say that's the largest mental health institution in Chicago. And it's a prison. It's a jail. It's not a healthcare facility. When you're in jail or in prison, are there real services for mental health? Are there real services out there to help people, to get the things that they need mentally?
So you're in Chicago, Sean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So years ago, my husband is deceased now. He died of cancer, but his sister actually is in law enforcement in Chicago. She's probably been an officer now for about 20, maybe 21 years. I believe it was 2018 or 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 2019. 20 she came to visit California, and she asked me about the expungement laws in Chicago. She says, what can we do, to combat, the guys on the corners or whatever? And she's a good officer. At that time, I looked up the laws in Chicago for criminal record expungement. And I want to say this was 2010 or 2011. At that time, the only charges that could be expunged were charges that did not lead to a conviction or you were fully acquitted by a jury. So for your audience, I want them to visualize something. In 2010, a young man or a young woman, they wake up and they're like, you know what? I'm done. I'm finished with this other life. I want to work. I want to do the right thing. I'm going out looking for employment. But they have criminal charges, convictions, minor, let's say just all misdemeanors. They cannot pass a background check.
Wow.
Period. And the fight that I know that I was following it for quite some time. Now it's not the same as it was then. But Mr. Sean, if you can go back and think about what I just said, how many thousands of young people and older in 2010, between 2010 and 2020, wanted to do something different but could not, and did not have fair access to mental health, to employments. I was there, I can't remember what year it was. There was 30 jobs available for some grocery store that was opening in Chicago. There was over 400 people in line for those jobs. I still have the newspaper article. And of those people, because I actually got out of the car and talked to some about their criminal records, and they were like, well, we're just seeing if we can get a chance. I'm not sure what services are offered in Chicago now, but I certainly hope it's better than it was in 2010, between 2010 and 2020.
Wow. No, I wish I could tell you the answer. We have a mayor now that one of the things he ran on was trying to get police officers to not be social service workers. So when they show up, but have I seen that? I can't say I've seen that.
Right.
Do you know, Sean, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but no, I learned something about police officers training that shocked me. So it takes longer to become a barber or a hairstylist than it does to become a police officer. Are you aware of that?
Yes. No clue.
In every state. So here in California, I want to say it's about 1,570 hours. That's about a year. It takes anywhere from 6 to 9 months to become a sworn-in police officer, car carrying, gun carrying officer. In those trainings, there's one huge component missing: customer service. Are you aware that our police officers do not undergo any customer service training whatsoever, which could help de-escalate? Because the first thing we say to someone when we meet them is, hello, how are you doing? We're checking for energy, right? Because out in the streets, energy meets energy. So if you're not being taught how to talk to people, then what are we doing? Right?
Right.
And to answer your earlier question about, individuals who are incarcerated and their ability to get mental health supports, the sad truth is, I was just in Washington, D.C., just got back on Friday night. The legislation that NAMI National is pushing, we have 3 initiatives. One is that when a person is incarcerated, their Medi-Cal and government health entitlements go away right away. Whether they've been convicted of the crime or not. Upon arrest, then it becomes the funding from their jurisdiction's general fund. That means when they're released, they have to start all over again with getting positioned again to receive Medi-Cal or Medicare. And that's the challenge that we face. So many individuals, when they're incarcerated, they're not if you're criminalized because your skin is weaponized, often, even though your family has records that you've lived with a diagnosed mental illness, it's up to the forensic department at the jail to make a determination. So many people who live with mental health challenges are in general population, and they continue to decompensate there. You have to have some pretty, strong advocacy, and you have to have some documentation from prior arrests before you're put into the mental health units of jail. So that's really unfortunate, because most people are not treated for their mental health challenge once they're incarcerated, and then they lose their benefit regardless of their background.
Wow, you brought something up, Earl. I want to kind of go back to and highlight. You mentioned that people tend to compensate because that's how they interact with the world around them. If they're in a prison population, they might be getting having an untreated mental health issue because nobody's recognizing it. They say, "Oh, that's just the way that guy acts. That's the way that lady is." And when really there's something underlying there that needs to be addressed. And if you let them back out into society and it hasn't been treated, what then is the likelihood for that to repeat?
Yeah, that's why the recidivism rate is so high, right? If you have an ailment, you don't take care of it, don't look at root cause, don't give people the proper care. Self-medication is real big for those who are experiencing a trauma. I personally don't think anyone can experience having their civil liberties taken away and then they come out balanced. It's going to be a period of time that they're going to have an adjustment. And if you're someone who lost everything because you've been incarcerated, we shouldn't have that gap for people waiting to get their benefits so that they can start the process of getting services. That's why we have, now reentry programs that we're putting in place. But most people who live with mental health challenges are not aware of it.
Wow. Now, Yvette, what's the biggest thing that you see, the most common thing that you expunge in your services?
Theft.
Really?
Yeah, it's so actually there's two: theft and drugs, selling and using. And I have two things that I say during my presentation, so I'm just going to get it out now. Everybody has a why, right? Is when you learn to trust again. Because what I basically do is I sit down with a person and I know that I'm trying to undo whatever harm that was caused to them prior to them meeting me, because they trusted someone. No one has ever bought their first high. Your first drink, your first smoke, it was through a friend or a close family member. No one has ever just walked into a store or walked up to a dealer. It doesn't work that way. Even dealing drugs, you are introduced to the dealer. So everyone has a why. And I learned years ago, your first high is free, and it's the last one that you may pay for, right? So it is drugs and dealing drugs and using drugs and theft. And with that being said, I also follow Brian Stevenson, founder of the Justice Center. Okay. Anyway, he says we are not the worst mistakes we have ever made in our lives. And when I heard him say that, I realized that's my population. That's Gigi's population and my population. And we're trying to undo anywhere from one mistake to 20 mistakes. But the first thing we have to do is build trust, because you can offer someone $1 million. If they don't trust where it's coming from, rightfully so, they don't want it. Right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's definitely drugs. And I've never met a person who volunteered to be addicted to anything for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. They didn't know. All drugs start off as being fun. Drinking starts off as being fun. It becomes I liken it to a relationship. You meet the drug. Oh, this is cool. I like this. Casually, and then as the relationship grows, or you start falling in love with it, then it's unstoppable. But then there's always that day, and their ready is not our ready, right? When they're ready to fall out of love, we just got to be there to support them. So I've always looked at it like a relationship.
If you were to give lawmakers advice or give the society advice about how to tackle right now the current epidemic, what's the name of the drug? What's the drug that's popular now? What's the name of it?
Fentanyl.
No, the fentanyl epidemic now. Every few years is a new epidemic. Now it's fentanyl. So what would you, it used to be crystal meth. I wanted to say crystal meth, but that's not even a thing no more. Now it's fentanyl they're talking about. What would you suggest to lawmakers and people out there to try to solve these problems, these drug problems that are hurting the streets?
Well, the approach that I think we are using isn't working, right? Because I'm really big on prevention. And so I participate in my county on the racial justice oversight body that demonstrates the fact that individuals who are from communities of color often end up incarcerated. And then you look at root cause of why someone would have committed a crime that led them to jail. It's the unaddressed trauma. So before the self-medication takes place, we got to look at what's happening in schools and the young people who are not being seen or heard, and not addressing mental health challenges early on. No matter what ethnicity the person is, they start looking for something to make them feel better. Self-medication comes from individuals looking for something outside of themselves to feel better. And if the root cause is unaddressed trauma, then we can't just focus only on the use of substances. We got to look at the harm and the pain that so many young people are carrying that makes them susceptible to saying, yes, I'll try this. That part for me is the part. I think that's why we have the folks who are living on the streets unsheltered. I got a call today from a parent who said, wow, they finally got my daughter into psych emergency services because she had a health condition, and they did the primary work was to treat her issues she was having with not being able to keep food down. But then her mom was able to find out where she was, get her into psych emergency services. And for the first time, they found methamphetamines in her system. So we're like, oh no. But if you're unsheltered and homeless and you become a part of a culture and you're trying to stay warm and you live in a jurisdiction that can predict how many people are going to die each winter from hypothermia, but we don't put the research into how do we keep them from becoming homeless in the first place?
Wow.
How do we keep them from joining a family, not a gang, a family, which is what they search for when they're in protection. And part of it is family. Come try what that takes an edge off a little for me. And that's the one thing about fentanyl. I've actually lost 2 staff members who live with mental health challenges, who one was pretty young and looking for a place to belong and probably didn't know it was in there. The other was a pretty long-term drug user and was found on public transportation. He had crashed out of his housing situation, and he was on what we call barred Bay Area Rapid Transit on the train, missing for 4 or 5 days. His mom trying to find him, and then when they did the autopsy, they found that it was fentanyl, and it's not, it's being laced into drugs that people use like heroin, but they don't know that the fentanyl is in there, or even marijuana, but they don't know that the fentanyl is in there, and it's deadly. And this country is paying attention to it now because this is one of those drugs, unlike crack, where it's across ethnicity. So it's being treated from a disease model, which is great. That we're looking at it from a disease model, where if we didn't do that for some of the drugs that primarily were used or thought of being used by African Americans. So I think that if I was, speaking to a legislator, I would always remind them, look at root cause and let's fix the problem we have with so many young people not getting their mental health challenges addressed and growing up and still, not finding what they need to find and then turning to drugs as a form of self-medication.
Yvette, we got a little bit of time left, about 3 minutes left. How long does it take to do an expungement usually?
Anywhere from 6 to 9 months now. Yeah, the courts all over are backed up. I recently did a podcast with TK Kirkland. So I started receiving a lot of calls from all over the place, every state. And they were telling me about their efforts in trying to do it themselves, and just giving them, giving them advice on where to go, and then looking into their charges. Here in California, 6 to 9 months. Outside of California, yeah, it can be anywhere from 6 to 9 months up to a year, actually. Wow. But it's a very rewarding process. I did have time to think of one person who was one of my biggest accomplishments. This gentleman had taken his Series 7's test and passed it to be a stockbroker.
Right.
And he went through the court process after I completed his paperwork, and he sent me a screenshot of a sign-on bonus of $220,000 with a brokerage firm in San Francisco. And so that was really exciting.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was just literally him doing the work before meeting me, and all it was just respecting the process. It's a process to get into trouble. It's a process to get out of it.
It's easier to get a pardon than it is to get a expunged record.
Really?
Right.
Wow.
And I want to let your audience know also that when you are filling out a job application and you say no to have you ever been convicted or arrested? If you have been arrested, please say yes. Because a simple arrest that did not lead to a conviction is on a rap sheet. But after you go through the expungement process, you can legally say no. My thing is, if you have to spread your hands, that's a live scan. You say yes, and you put down the date that your record was expunged, right? If you do not have to undergo a live scan, then you can say no. But to any arrest that did not lead to conviction, own that arrest on that piece of paper, please.
So if you've been arrested but went to a trial process, but you were not convicted, you can say no. Did I hear that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Wow. But they should legally, they're not even supposed to be asking about arrests that did not lead to convictions, but that's for part 2 when you bring me back to talk about that.
We're out of time. Thanks for Yvette for coming to our show, because you gave us a lot of great information. And then also, I think this is something that really is part of the root causes. We've talked about a lot of things at the high end level of, we talk about things at the top of how, what the problems are in the country and things like that. But these are the root causes of the things that if we can tackle these things and fix these things, that will make our nation and our community stronger and better. We can not have to worry about these fentanyl overdoses and all these different deaths that are going on. And I'm scared. Like every generation, the drug comes after is worse than the drug that came before. It's more deadly than the drug that came before. I mean, fentanyl, you can die just from touching the stuff.
Right.
Thanks a lot, guys, for coming on our show.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. This is American Heroes Group. Be right back. Stay tuned.